So keep your gossip down. Brother John, I heard what you were saying. I'm going to tell Nancy Pelosi.
Now the whole world knows what my new nickname for your daughter is.
Did you like that shirt? She made that shirt. She didn't actually sew the shirt, she just tied it. Which my wife got asked by 2 different people in one day if she made her own clothing. So you know you're pretty modest if people think you make your own clothing. We're going to be in Acts chapter 21. And honestly, for me, this chapter, to be teaching it to you while you're eating, is going to be difficult because there's a lot of crazy stuff in this chapter. So I'm going to try to explain it to you best I can. And kids, I'll try to explain it to you best I can too, because in Acts chapter 21, this is the Apostle Paul is going to Jerusalem. And let me just put it like this. Everything goes wrong. Has anybody ever experienced that? He goes and everything goes wrong. It's like, could it get any more wrong? It's like 2020, really. It's like, and then, so when Trump said he had coronavirus, that only made sense, right? I mean, you expect some more stuff to happen, so. But, have you ever went on a trip and everything went wrong? You know what's funny is my kids are car sick and they're car sick in my car every time. But if they go with Evan, they're okay. Is it how you drive? No, they're sick? Okay.
He's got sick.
Alright, so he's got sick.
He just gave me plenty of points, okay.
Well, that's good. Usually the warning is this for me. Okay. And the second I hear that noise, I have no time to react. When you're in a minivan, you don't really have roll down windows all around. Or the ones we have don't roll all the way down and they can't get their head up there. So we do the patented bowl or cup, which to this day, I still have nightmares because when I was a kid, we were traveling in a car with a shag carpet, like a big van with a shag carpet, teardrop window. Here's what my mom would give us in our car trips. She would give us a trash bag. And we had this trash bag that somebody threw up in, and my cousin was playing with it. Okay? Yeah, I know, you are eating. I feel bad for y'all, because I'm just drinking that. So anyways, car trips. Has anybody ever had a vehicle break down on a trip, Brother John? Okay. Has anybody ever been driving a load of hay and the load of hay catch on fire while they're driving? And possibly they park at a gas station just in case you want to inflame the whole gas station. Because the wheel bearing went out of the trailer. Is that what?
For some.
Maybe you're not exactly sure. It was bad hay management, like forest management. That's what it was. You're supposed to space the hay 5 feet, social distance the hay. And it's like when we were at the golf course yesterday. I went in, I know this sounds, just hear me out before you get upset. I walked into the outhouse, they had an outhouse. And there was a sign, the first thing he said real big was, it said, capacity 10 people. But under that it was explaining that for a week of 40 hours, only 10 people should use it. A work week of 40 hours. But it said real big, capacity 10 people. I'm like, I'm going to go with capacity 1 person. Okay, that's what I think I would do. So sometimes things don't work. So I want to look at this and I want to read some of the scriptures, but I really want to explain it to you more. He gets to Jerusalem, and it says in verse 18 of chapter 21, and the day following, Paul went with us unto James, and all the elders were present. And when he had saluted them, he declared particularly what things God had wrought amongst the Gentiles by his ministry. When they heard it, they glorified the Lord. And I want you to first look how first he was telling these Jewish people that these Gentiles got saved. And they glorified the Lord. That's how it starts out. But then listen to what they said. And said unto him, Thou seest, brother, how many thousands of Jews there are which believe, and they are all zealous of the law. Guess what? I want you to understand that when Paul got saved, remember he was in a religion that had to follow the rules and follow the law. And that's what they believed was going to get them saved. And he got saved out of that, knowing that Jesus is how you get saved. But he wasn't against the law. He wasn't fighting the law. I mean, he thought the law was still a good thing. He just didn't want you to do it to get saved. Well, these Jews that were saved at the church there, he comes and he's talking about all the people that got saved that were Gentiles. And he traveled all over, of course, got beat up and hurt so these people could get saved. And we've been studying some of those through the book of Acts. But guess what the Jews did? They were like, we've had thousands of Jews here get saved, and they're zealous of the law. And they actually kind of started arguing with them. And to really understand it, I mean, basically, it was like, we see in the media happen today with the Democrats and Republicans just fighting, right? No matter, like, nobody can do anything good. It's like if one side did something good, the other side says bad, even if it is good. They can't admit that, hey, some of these peace treaties Trump's did is pretty good. And I don't know maybe the Democrats do something good I haven't noticed, but if they have, we should acknowledge it, right? I know there's some things that if they did and voted in, I would go for it, right? If it was good. But here's the thing. So he's saying all this, and one commentator kind of described this. Just imagine, thousands upon thousands of people saved by faith, and all this stuff, and all these, remember Mars Hill preaching, the miracles, the different, all the people trying to kill him. He'd tell all this stuff. And then it's kind of like, they look at him and they just say, well, that's great, but, we're kind of thinking that you don't like the law. In other words, they were kind of dismissing everything he said. Now, let me explain that to you. And I don't want this to sound rude. I don't want this to sound bad. But there are some people out there. You can have thousands get saved. Are you listening? Thousands get saved. And there's some people out there that say, yeah, but that group of people or whatever, and they may not think a big deal of it. I'm just being honest with you. Does that make sense to you? Like racist sometimes. Like, for instance, let's say we had 100 black people get saved at Victory Baptist Church. I'd be excited. It's just as exciting as 100 white people get saved. Amen? But there's some people who'd be like, they wouldn't say it, right? But they would think it, or they might say it. Some of them might say it. But, this is what the Jews were doing. Can you imagine? This is the Apostle Paul, right? We think he's like the greatest preacher ever. And they're almost implying that he did it wrong. Like he told people how to get saved wrong. Who thinks the Apostle Paul, who wrote the book of Romans, kind of knows how to get saved? Amen? I think so. And I think that he knew what he was doing whenever he led these people to Christ. But the Jews are kind of arguing with him. And it gets really weird. It's not even weird yet. It's about to get weird. And this is one of the weirdest stories, I think, in the book of Acts. And I don't know, some of y'all may not even remember hearing the story, but it's in Acts 21, so you should read it later. Just read the chapter, especially the last part is where it explains it. So, it said they glorified God when they first heard it. But when someone says, hey, that's great, God is good, and then they basically say, but, there's a problem, right? They should just glorify God. So they go on and they're kind of explaining. Like I said, it's kind of hard. Now, if you sit down and read it and you know what I just told you, you can kind of work it out in your head. But so they're talking about the law. They talk about the Gentiles. He said, and they informed of thee that thou teachest all the Jews which are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, neither to walk after the customs. What is it therefore? The multitude must needs come together, for they will hear that thou art come. So what they're saying is, it's been rumored that you're telling people not to follow our customs anymore. And the truth is, Paul wasn't really doing that. Paul wasn't running around saying being a Jew is wrong. That's not how he wanted people to Christ. Paul went, and you can read in the scriptures, he preached Christ. He preached Jesus Christ, and people got saved. And his goal wasn't to make them turn from the law, because, by the way, even today, the law is not bad. There's good things in the law. The law doesn't save you, but it's good. Even the dietary laws are good, actually. I don't follow them, but they're good for your health. Right? It's really not good for you to eat bacon. But we YOLO, so anyways, no. I mean, you only live once, right? We're going to have a little bacon. I'm just saying, he said it's not unlawful now to eat bacon, now. But the truth is, in Moses' law, you go back to Leviticus, some of that stuff. There's a lot of things it's okay to follow. Well, anyways, so they're kind of arguing with him about it. Now, here's where it gets really weird. This is when it's going to kind of pick up on a weird thing. So they're kind of arguing with him about it, and they're kind of talking to him about it. And then they say, and there's some men, right? Basically, there was 4 men that were taking this vow. And what they do is, they let me read this verse to you and I'll explain it. Do therefore this that we say to you. We have 4 men which have a vow on them. Take them and purify thyself with them, and be at charges with them, that they may shave their heads, and all may know that those things wherefore they were informed concerning thee are nothing, but thou thyself also walkest orderly and keepest the law. As touching the Gentiles which believe, we have written and concluded that they observe no such thing, save only that they keep themselves from things offered to idols, and from blood, and strangled, and from fornication. Then Paul took the men, and the next day, purifying himself with them, entered the temple to signify the accomplishment of the days of purification, until that an offering should be offered for every one of them. So here's what Paul does. He goes through this Jewish ritual that he doesn't have to do. He knows he doesn't have to do it. He's saved, and he knows it's not part of salvation. But he goes with these 4 men, they shave their heads. We're not sure if he shaved his head, but he may have, because he was going into the part of the temple that it's called the purification. Probably he did shave his head. That's really weird that he did this with the Jews, but you got to understand, he doesn't think this is saving him. And what he's trying to do is save face with them in a way so he can talk to these Jews and explain to them, because obviously some of these Jews were really had some hostility towards Gentiles being saved. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Is they were almost like not believing that the Gentiles were even saved because they didn't follow all these customs. And they weren't following all the customs, but you got to understand, they didn't even know all the customs, right? I mean, nobody taught them. They weren't Jews. How many of y'all know all the Jewish customs? I mean, I don't know them all. You know how much show would be to learn? But if you grew up as a Jew, you know it. I mean, it'd just be like, whether you put ketchup in the refrigerator or the cabinet, it's just, you're going to know what to do, right? It's just certain things about your life you know. I still, do things that I did when I was a kid, right? Because it was a custom to do it. It was just what we did. I eat in bed, Cody. I get crumbs in the bed, Cody. And then if Bruce out of the room, I just flick the cover and get all the crumbs on her side. It's just a blessing. It's called saving food for later. That's what it's called, yeah, saving food for later. It's good. It's good to have a few, like the immune system. You just got to have some bugs around. You got to keep some living organisms in the house, right? But unless they're yellow jackets, then you kill them. So Paul's actually going through with this. How many of y'all think it's really weird that he's doing this? It is. When you read it, you're like, why didn't Paul, you know what Paul usually did to people like this? He looked them in the eye and he started telling them how it was going. But, I actually think these Jews were saved that he was talking to at this place. I think they had led people to the Lord that were Jews, and they were Jewish believers. And so, just like this, you're going to be a little bit patient if somebody gets saved and they're in sin. You got to be patient about their sin because they don't know it's wrong. You got to teach them and give them time. Well, a Jew that follows the custom, it's going to take them time to realize I don't have to follow the custom. He's going to feel awkward not following the custom. I felt awkward not doing the sign of the cross after I got saved because I did it every time I came into a church. I thought you were supposed to do this. I thought you were. That's just like even at Ruth Bader Ginsburg's, funeral. I thought it was odd people walked up to her casket and did this. She was Jewish. And the sign of the cross wasn't meant anything to her. And plus all those people are not very godly and they're doing, something that means God. So that was also awkward. But all I'm saying to you is, so Paul was trying to be patient. And Paul was trying to exhibit long suffering and all that. Paul was trying to tell them, hey, good, it's good. Gentiles got saved. They didn't like the fact that Gentiles weren't following the law, so he started to do one of the rituals. And here's where it gets really awesome. It's just like, this is just what happens in life. So he does all these things. Why is he doing it? To make things good with the Jews. Then, here's what happens on verse 27. And when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews which were of Asia, when they saw him in the temple, stirred up all the people and laid hands on him. They were going to hurt him. Why? And here's why. Crying out, Men of Israel, help. This is the man that teacheth all men everywhere against the people and the law and the place, and further brought Greeks also into the temple and hath polluted this holy place. So listen carefully. This is so like this happens today too. Paul was in the temple with these 4 men. They were Jews. They were going through the purification. It was okay for them to be in the temple. But somebody started a rumor that he had some Greeks in there, which actually they wouldn't have been allowed in the temple. They wouldn't have been allowed in the holy place, and it would have been bad. So they're saying Paul is bringing in these unclean Greeks or whatever and messing the temple up. And for they had seen him with him in the city, Trophimus and Ephesian, whom they supposed Paul brought in the temple. They thought he was somebody he wasn't. So it was a misunderstanding. And they were going to, listen to this. I mean, it says, and all the city was moved, and the people ran together, and they took Paul, drew him out of the temple, and forthwith the doors were shut. And as they went about to kill him, tidings came unto the chief captain of the band that all Jerusalem was in an uproar. I mean, and you got to understand this. Sometimes if you're not careful about following rules, sometimes you'll try to kill somebody and think that's okay. Like, it's not okay for the Greeks to go in the temple, but it's okay to murder a guy for bringing the Greeks to the temple. Doesn't make sense. There's a famous, religious person and I've read some of his stuff. His name's John Calvin. And a lot of people, and he had some good insight. But he thought it was okay if someone was a heretic, or what they deemed a heretic, to burn him at the stake with oil. I don't think that's okay. I don't think that's the way you do things. I mean, literally get somebody up and just pour burning oil on them and kill them. Right? And it's pretty proven a lot of times when they said these people were heretics, they didn't really have a lot of proof of what was even really going on. And if you read back in those days, a lot of people got killed. But he thought it was okay. And I'm just saying to you, sometimes we need to understand that 2 wrongs don't make a right, I mean, maybe it was bad taste for Greeks to be in the temple. First off, the Greeks weren't in the temple. It wasn't even the 4 guys that they thought it was. That was all wrong. They should have got their facts straight and talked to somebody, right? That would have been good. Another thing is this. Don't be one of those people that thinks it's good if somebody you like gets saved, but if somebody you don't like gets saved, that's no big deal. Like, you know what? If Trump got saved, I'd be pretty happy, right? And some people say, well, maybe he's saved. Yeah, but you know what? He doesn't say he's saved, and he doesn't say he asked God for forgiveness. He said, I just try better. And that's not being saved. Being saved is asking God for forgiveness. Because no matter how good you try, you'll never be good enough, right? You got to ask God to save you. Now, some of you, if it came out and he said, my parents talked to me, showed me in the book of Romans how to be saved, and I accepted Jesus, there'd be a lot of Christians would be throwing parties, right? If Nancy Pelosi said it, there'd be a lot of Christians going, fake news, right? Okay, see, and that's just what I'm saying. We look at things wrong sometimes. We need to, a lot of people weren't happy when Paul got saved. Because Paul was a Pharisee, right? Paul was, and a lot of people didn't like him getting saved. So it gets better, though. Actually worse. I'm talking about things not going your way. So he comes to report of the Gentiles being saved, and they're like, you teach the laws wrong. You're stupid. So I'll go through this ritual. He goes through the ritual. Now they want to kill him because they suppose he took some Greeks in there. So they're about to kill him. So then here's what happened. As they went to kill him, it says it came to the chief captain of the band that all Jerusalem was in uproar. So who immediately took soldiers and centurions and ran down unto them. When they saw the chief captain and the soldiers, they left beating of Paul. So now that the soldiers showed up, they stopped beating him up. Then the chief captain came near, and look, this sounds like today in America. Then the chief captain came near and took him and commanded him to be bound with 2 chains and demanded who he was and what he had done. Do you get that? They arrested Paul. Do you see that Paul was not the one doing things wrong? The Jews were trying to kill Paul. The chief captain shows up, and guess what he does? The soldiers, the centurions, they come and they arrest Paul. Sounds like today, right? I mean, people arrest the wrong person sometimes. And so now Paul's bound up. He's arrested. All he was trying to do is be excited about some people getting saved. And it's all led to this. And it's just getting worse and worse. Now, and some cried one thing, some another. That sounds right. Some cried one thing, some cried another thing. Some were saying this happened, some were saying that happened. You ever asked your kids what happened before? Get two different stories? I got 4 kids. I get 8 stories sometimes. Okay? See, right there. See, she sums up, he says, no, you don't. Okay? I mean, there you go. Perfect example. I'm surprised she's doing thumbs down, but I thought she would have did that. Okay, you know? I mean, that's about right. So, and when he could not know the certainty for the turmoil, he commanded him to be carried into the castle. So they wouldn't shut up, so they had to take him to the castle because everybody's like, this happened, this happened, this happened. And he couldn't understand, they couldn't tell what was going on. So when he came upon the stairs, so it was that he was born of the soldiers for the violence of the people, for the multitude of the people followed after, crying, away with him. So here's Paul, and he's led into the castle in the next verse. And he gets in there, and as he was led in there, he said, May I speak unto thee? Who said, Canst thou speak Greek? He asked this question. This is Paul saying, Paul was led into the castle, and he said to the chief captain, May I speak unto thee? Who said, Canst thou speak Greek? So the guys asked him, Can you speak Greek? And then listen to this, and you have to, the only way you can know what you're talking about is Josephus, the historian, wrote about this in his book. He was a historian from the time, and otherwise we wouldn't know what in the world he's talking about. But if you look this up, you can see what he said. But here's what he said. Art not thou that Egyptian, which before these days made an uproar and leadest out in the wilderness 4,000 men that were murderers? So now when he gets in there and he's being persecuted, they think he's somebody else. And listen to who that Egyptian, here's Josephus tells him an Egyptian who is a false prophet, who some years earlier led 4,000, and this is what Josephus wrote, out to the Mount of Olives. Roman soldiers killed hundreds, but the leader escaped. They thought that Paul was the leader of that led these 4,000 out, so now they really wanted to kill him. So it went from, he led all these Gentiles to the Lord. The Jews didn't like that because he was teaching against the law. And so he goes through some of the law to prove that he's on their side. Then they think he did something wrong by bringing people in the temple who he didn't even bring in the temple. They try to kill him. So he gets rescued by soldiers that now think he's some false prophet that they've been looking for a long time that they want to kill. And all I'm going to tell you is this, because we can't go through the whole story tonight. We will go through some more of this, but basically what we see is that he ends up getting arrested for this, and it ends up leading him to Rome eventually. And it really isn't the way he wanted to go to Rome. He always said he wanted to go to Rome, but he thought he was just going to go to Rome on his own. He didn't know he was going to be a prisoner going to Rome. And that's ended up, he's getting an all-expense paid trip to Rome. I mean, food, everything, boat, it's all provided. You know, a few beatings and chains, but you know, it's kind of like when you go get these trips with the sales meeting. You know, that was the sales meeting was the beating and the chain. They're almost as bad, I think, okay? Have you ever been invited? Has anybody ever went to one of those, like, oh, it's all free, and they're trying to sell me everything, right? But can I tell you this? So I want you to see that there's some things you can learn from this story real quick, and we'll be done. Just some practical things that you can learn. First, don't let the failures of people around you or things that happen, don't let them stop you. Because Paul didn't get stopped by this. We know this is only chapter 21. There's several chapters left. This didn't stop Paul. In fact, when we read in Romans, he talks about a castle. There's a verse that he mentions in the castle. And many believe that because of how high up he was as far as Pharisees, that when he was in prison, he would have been right by like the Caesar's palace. He even mentions, one verse says palace. Now it said castle here when he was meeting with this guy. Later it says palace whenever he gets to Rome. But so what I'm saying is, he was able to get right in the center of Rome. You know, there's an old saying, all roads lead to Rome. Right? And what that meant was, Rome was kind of the center of everything at the time. I mean, it was the main city. Getting to Rome was the greatest thing you could do, because, you know, we talk about the Romans road, because all roads lead to Rome. The reason that he was able to lead so many to Christ go back to the fact that he made it to Rome. He made it to Rome because of this little story that happened that probably was a very disappointing thing in his life. So sometimes when things are going bad, trust me, they're not going bad, they're going good. If you're doing what Christ wants you to do, it's good. Learn that, you know, God always has a bigger picture in mind. God always has a bigger picture in mind. You know, God wasn't shocked or surprised when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died before the election. That seems like a really off time for her to pass away. But God wasn't shocked about it, right? He knows how things happen. And I'm just telling you, God wasn't surprised when the coronavirus showed up in the when it got to the United States, whenever it was, he wasn't surprised about it in China when they made it. No, anyway, no, I'm sorry. But I mean, he wasn't surprised about it. I'm sorry to say that. You can fact check that. Okay, but and they will. It'll just be edited out. Watch to that part of the video and see if they edit that out. It'll be like dubbed over some voice trying to sound like me, right? It's just, but here's the thing. God's not shocked. How many of you ever had some problems? God wasn't shocked. He knew about it. And I'm just telling you this, that even in bad things, God knew what he was doing. God had a bigger plan. God wanted Paul to get to Rome. Paul wanted to get to Rome. Paul talked about getting to Rome all the time. And I can't, you know, I just think about some preachers that I know that prayed to have a big ministry and a world outreach and stuff. And one of them was John Bishop. And he doesn't remember it, but his wife said he would pray that he could have a bigger impact, that he could reach more people than he was reaching. And by getting sick, he has. I know that sounds scary, but by getting sick, who thinks John Bishop has reached more people by getting sick than he would have if he'd not got sick? I think so. I mean, he's had a way broader scope of ministry that he would have never had. He may have had a good church there in Heber Springs, and it may have had a couple hundred people, and it may have supported missions and did some great things, and still had a church camp. But I think that he's reached more people by having his disease that's made it harder on him. But he prayed for that, right? Sometimes when you pray, God, give me a bigger ministry. God, let me reach more for you. Or God, do this. Or God, do that. Like for instance, would you be shocked if you said, God, I want my marriage to be better. Please help my marriage. And then next week you lost your job. You'd be like, that's not what I said, God. I said help my marriage. And maybe God was saying losing your job is going to help your marriage. Is that possible? Right? He said, God, I need, help me with my kids. You know what people think God's going to do to help them with their kids? Give them more money. But what if God says, let's have less money to help you with your kids? You know it's possible to do better raising your kids with less money sometimes? It is possible. Some of the greatest men, Abraham Lincoln, grew up in a little cabin, a little poor, he was a poor kid. I mean, a lot of great men of God in the past were poor kids. They grew up and had very little. And I'm just saying to you, God works things together for good, right? To them that love God. God sometimes even uses bad to accomplish good. And that's what's weird, because God works things all together for good. So, I mean, he includes the bad in there. And so he knows the strategy. Whenever, even if God didn't make this happen, God was watching it happen. When he saw the people try to kill Paul, it's like God said, oh, this is my chance. Like a light bulb went off. They're trying to kill him. I don't want him to die. He's got to get to Rome. He wants to get to Rome. I'll make him get arrested so he can go to Rome. So God kind of steps in and makes some things. And look, I'm not saying God makes everybody do things, but here, listen carefully. God can change circumstances to make things change. Some things are all about timing. I mean, for instance, have you ever got there was an accident on the road, but you had to stop because one of your kids had to use the bathroom, and then you got in the car and you're going to this big accident on the road, and you go, if we hadn't stopped to the bathroom, we might have been in that accident. Right? God's timing. God knows what He's doing, right? Sometimes in life, God slows you down or speeds you up or whatever He needs to do because He knows the circumstances. If He can line them up just right, there could be a thing. Like I said, I don't think when we look at our current state in America, Donald Trump being president isn't a surprise. I think God orchestrated some things. I think there's something going on that God's trying to get the circumstances, you know? And that's why you got to be worried about mail-in voting, right? I'm just saying, there are some things that God can orchestrate whatever happens to try to make it go to the way He wants it to go. Because in the end, here's the thing. He wrote the book of Revelation already. He's not going to rewrite it. It's got to happen like that. So somehow He's going to make sure all circumstances end up that way. He's going to make sure they end up that way. You know, we were leaving out of the house the other day. I looked to the moon and it was like really orange. I'm like, whew, that's not blood red. Right? You know, there's going to be a full moon on Halloween this year. Just works out perfect for 2020. Full moon on Halloween. I'm just glad the hotel we stayed in Washington, D.C. didn't have a 13th floor. Well, it did. It was just called the 14th floor. Okay? But you know, that's how they do it. Some buildings never put a 13th floor. I'm not superstitious. I always call that superstitious. But anyways, here's the thing. And I want to give you 3 quick things. Listen, number 1, don't get your eyes on people. Get your eyes on the Lord. See, Ruth's camera's got this now, but like real fancy cameras, they will make it where you can focus and one thing's real clear in the background and blur it. And that's, you know what? You need Jesus to be the thing you're focusing on, and everything else needs to be blurred. But nobody wants a picture where it's like the person's face is blurry and the background's real clear. You know? You ever see a picture, like a wedding picture, the bride's there in her wedding dress, and then all the flowers behind her are perfectly in, look perfect, and she's blurred. Right? You never see that. It's always the bride looks pristine in a little Photoshop, and then the back looks blurry. Right? And maybe slim face filter or something like that. And I'm just saying, if you would let Jesus be your focus, because if you focus on people, how many people do you know that don't sin? How many? Besides your wife. Okay, no, or at least that's what she says. But here's the thing. Everybody's a sinner. Everybody's going to mess up. If you focus on people, you'll find something wrong. They found something wrong with the Apostle Paul. And let me explain to you, if the Apostle Paul lived today, you'd find something wrong with him too. You just would. Quit focusing on people. Focus on Jesus, and then you can handle the people. You'll be able to, Paul is a perfect example of that. Second, remember that while you go through a trial, even if you had 4 flat tires on a trip. Has anybody ever done that before on a trip? All 4 tires? My dad one time bought these tires from Walmart. First time I ever known him to buy brand new tires. I mean, his whole life he's always buying used tires, right? He buys brand new tires. We had a 68 Impala Super Sport. We were going to Little Rock. I know that's ridiculous to have that, but that's what we have. Okay? We were going to Little Rock, and one of the tires separated. It was only like a month old. One of the tires separated. We pulled over, put a spare on. On the way back, another tire separated. Before we said that, all 4 of those tires at some point separated on that car. And he took them to Walmart. They gave him, new tires and everything because he wasn't going to have it any other way. But I'm going to tell you right now. I'm just saying, sometimes things happen and we don't know why. But just remember, God is working something together for good if you'll just love Him. And remember that God's instruments to accomplish His purpose are often people. And sometimes even evil people. Like sometimes God uses the worst sinner and somehow turns it for good. Because even the Apostle Paul was one of the worst sinners. And God saved him. And he did bad things. But sometimes people who never get saved are still used by the Lord. I mean, really, I even think I was reading a book one time and it was talking about what happened with Hitler and the Nazis and all that, do you know what that did? That did give the world a sympathy for the Jews. It was a horrible thing that happened. But it brought to light the fact that there were people against the Jews. And God can take some really bad things and He can use it to start moving it towards His purpose. And I want to tell you this. Don't resist God when He does this in your life. Here's what Paul did. He went, he followed, he let them arrest him, he went on the boat, we'll read later, he goes to Rome, he does everything. We know that a bunch of people get saved because of what he does. Now, a lot of you would have been like, it would have been a better story if Paul would have got to retire and write a bunch of best-selling books. Like scrolls, okay? Best-selling scrolls. And could have retired in a little cabin, maybe had a staff, just a small business, retired and just lived his life in his golden years instead of going to prison and getting killed. But he was more effective going to the prison. He was more effective. And I'm just telling you today, sometimes maybe you're not effective because you fight the persecution instead of just realize the persecution is not that big a deal. It's okay. And I can't help but think of it, like I said, I think we need to pray for Donald Trump to get saved, right? But I can't understand why he does what he does. I wouldn't want to be in his place and be hated so much. No doubt he's hated by a lot of people. He's also loved by a lot of people, but he's hated by people too. And I can't imagine doing what he does. I want to tell you, be willing to be hated by some people for the Lord. Because we're obviously living in a time where that's pretty commonplace. So you let Gentiles to the Lord, you don't want to follow the law, and then He does what they say, they try to kill Him. And then God uses some lost people to come in and take them to Rome. So all things work together for good. Those bow our heads. Lord, we love you, and God, we no doubt have troubles and trials in our lives sometimes. But God, I'm anxious to see what's going to happen. I don't know what you're going to do with my kids. I don't know what you're going to do with our church members. I don't know what you're going to do with America. But I think you got a big plan. I think you got a great plan. I think there's something coming. And God, help us to be willing to be persecuted, willing to do the hard thing and work hard and forgive. And Lord, I love that. I don't ever find time where the Apostle Paul was bitter towards these Jews for what they did. They were trying to kill him. And as we read the rest of the book of Acts, I don't hear him talking about it. I don't hear him mentioning it or having a bitterness towards the Jews that were saved there. And Lord, I see that he was forgiving. Lord, help us be that way. And God, I pray that as we go home tonight, we get ready for next week, we'll let it be a profitable week for you, Lord, that we would find somebody to help, find somebody to witness to, find somebody to be a blessing to, and show your love to others, Lord, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, we're going to dismiss, and hopefully you got some Tums because we're eating some heartburn food, right?